Yeah, welcome again to everybody that's joined or is joining. We'll start here in about 30 seconds or so. Everybody here is on time, so certainly want to respect that. Yeah, doing a about 5-10 second countdown. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started for today. So welcome. Oh, let me turn on my video to introduce myself. There we go. Hi, everybody. My name is Josh Brothheim. I'm the training manager at Sumo Logic, based out of Portland, Oregon. And I have two of my peers joining us today. So Marie and Ona, you guys out there? Yeah, there you are. Hey, Ona.
Hi. Hello.
Hey, Marie. So they're going to be assisting today. So throughout today's session, if there's any questions, comments, thoughts, whatever, just go ahead and post them in the chat. And we'll get to them. Either they'll answer them directly, or if it's relevant to the conversation, we'll bring those questions in and answer them as a group. So yeah, let's get started here. So here's an agenda. So first off, welcome to CloudSIM Administration. Hopefully you're in the right class. If you're not, you'll still learn something today, just might not be what you expected. But today is CloudSIM Administration. So we're going to be together for the next 3 hours. There's a block of time for 3.5 hours. We're not going to be using all that time, so you will get time back, which I think is good. And so that's today's discussion. So what are we going to talk about for 3 hours together? Well, here's what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to talk about the CloudSIM data pipeline, what it is, how it works, just get some terminology together and understand it. And then we're going to be doing labs today. So throughout today's session, there's going to be slides. It's not no slides, but there are going to be labs. We want to make it interactive. I don't want to read slides to you for the next 2 hours because that's not fun for either one of us. So we'll be doing some labs. We'll look at data processing. We'll do some labs around it. We'll look at customizing and tuning CloudSIM. We'll do some labs around it. And then we'll take an exam, or you will. I've passed the exam already. So today is 3 hours as mentioned together, although the schedule says 3.5, it's really 3 hours. 2 hours, the first 2 hours will be devoted to the content. So the slides, the labs, the questions, whatever it might be. We'll throw a little break in there as well. And then after 2 hours, so at about 11 o'clock local time, we'll take an exam. And so the exam we'll talk about in more detail a little bit later. It's a free exam, great opportunity for you to prove your Sumo knowledge. And there's also an added benefit that I'll talk about in a moment. All right. So here's that added benefit that I wanted to talk about. Is we're going to reward you for attending today. So for attending today's class and passing the exam at the end of today, we're going to give you basically buy you lunch. So we'll provide you with the $15 Uber Eats voucher, and you can utilize that. So once you're done with today's exam and you pass it, go ahead and send your certificate to training@sumologic.com, and I'll post a slide later. And then, like I said, we'll email you that Uber Eats voucher. Give us 48 hours to do so. Also, another promotion. So we have our Sumo Logic 6, as we call it. If you get 6 certifications, we'll provide you with a backpack. I'll post this link as well later. These are some of the goodies you have to look forward to, but let's get into the content. Let's start learning a little bit about CloudSIM and specifically the data pipeline. So first off, what is CloudSIM? It's a pretty good question to start with. CloudSIM is a cloud-based enterprise-grade security information and event management system. And so that's where that SIM, security information and event management, that acronym comes from. CloudSIM leverages Sumo Logic core functionality, including data collection, ingestion, storage, and threat intelligence. CloudSIM is a purchased add-on with the ever-expanding library of content designed for security operations. Because it's designed for larger data volumes, most organizations need to ingest a large amount of data each day for insights to surface in CloudSIM. I'm going to go ahead and just turn off my video. I'm getting a little choppy here already. So what we see here is our CloudSIM data pipeline, as I just alluded to in the agenda. So CloudSIM is a powerful tool. It's going to take millions of log messages and funnel them down into a handful of actionable security insights. So first, there we go. The logs are going to be collected and ingested by Sumo Logic into messages. So those logs come in and then they turn into messages. Now you have a bunch of messages. What happens to those? Those messages are then going to be parsed, mapped, and enriched and turned into CloudSIM records. The records are then going to be compared to rules. If a rule is triggered, an entity will be extracted, a severity score will be assigned, and then a signal will be created. Finally, if there's enough signals within the same entity cluster, then they become an insight. As a cloud administrator, it's going to be your job to make sure that this pipeline flows smoothly. In this course, we're going to be focusing on the first part of the pipeline. You'll learn how to forward your data to CloudSIM, customize the schema mappings, and tune the SOC content to support the analysts on your SOC team. All these customizations and optimizations will help reduce false positives and enable your SOC analyst teammates to investigate and hunt threats faster. Certainly, if you want to learn more about investigating signals and insights, our CloudSIM Fundamentals certification is appropriate for that. If you haven't taken that course, that's fine. You're still certainly going to learn things today. But just as a heads up, the first portion is focused on the CloudSIM Fundamentals really focuses on that. But we're going to be focusing on this first kind of top half of this diagram today. So what are we going to be focusing on? Well, we're going to use our example here of Sumo Logic Coffee. And Sumo Logic Coffee ingests and collects millions of log messages into Sumo Logic. So the Sumo Logic Coffee selling cups of coffee all around the world, millions of transactions a day. That data is collected and brought into Sumo Logic as a log message, as just described. Those messages are then going to be forwarded to CloudSIM. This process is going to be set up using the Sumo Logic interface. Now, talking about data, what data are you ingesting? It's going to be a good idea to periodically examine the data you're ingesting and sending into CloudSIM. As an admin, you're going to be responsible for data ingestion, so you want to ask yourself these questions. Are you ingesting enough data? CloudSIM is going to take thousands or millions of records and boil them down into just a handful of insights. Most organizations ingest more than 50 gigs of data every day to start finding any insights. If your ingest volume is smaller than this, you might want to consider sending more data to CloudSIM or using another security solution like the Threat Intel app that we offer. Now, are you ingesting too much data? Because more data doesn't always mean more insights. The threat detection logic built into CloudSIM generally prevents false positives. However, some organizations choose to ingest or store less data as a way to cut costs. One solution is partitioning your data into different tiers and only sending some of that data along to CloudSIM. Now, are you ingesting the right data? CloudSIM doesn't just work on quantity alone. Quality data will affect your performance as well. As a best practice, you need to bring in quality data sources that are supported by CloudSIM. High-value data sources include CloudTrail logs, Windows event logs, AWS logs, guard duty logs. You should also consider whether your data is structured, like key-value pairs, or unstructured, like plain text files. Most data ingested into Sumo Logic is semi-structured, like JSON logs. Now, once you've answered these questions, you can then assess what is or isn't working for you and your SOC team, and then you can partition your data to Sumo Logic and forward some or all of it into CloudSIM. Now, this next level, if you will, of the pipeline. After you forward your data from Sumo Logic into CloudSIM, your messages must go through a processing first. First, CloudSIM is going to process the messages into records. Each record is going to contain the information from a message, which is going to be parsed into key value pairs, mapped to the CloudSIM schema, and enriched with other data. This process is usually automatic, but must be completed for certain types of data sources, specifically custom data sources. If you do need to configure log and ingest mappings, there's going to be certain details you need to know about your data, like whether it's structured or unstructured, whether it has a syslog header, what data type it is it JSON, is it XML? You're going to need to know the vendor as well. So are they going to be Windows event logs, Palo Alto firewall logs, AWS guard duty logs? Once you know the details of your data, then you can work with the Sumo Logic documentation for specific help configuring your data pipeline. In this course, though, we're going to be using ingesting and processing simple structured JSON log messages to demonstrate this configuration process. Now let's follow a simple log message down this pipeline. First, the message is going to be parsed and extracted from the record. Then it's going to be mapped into a set of key value pairs. This process is also going to fix basic formatting. And so this step is going to create semi-structured data. So for example, on the left-hand side of the screen, we have the IP or IP-127-0-0-1. The parsing step is going to extract that IP address and turn it into a key value pair, whereas we see on the right-hand side of the screen, the key is something like, or specifically, source device underscore IP, and the value is 127.0.0.1, and those hyphens have been normalized to dots. This information is mapped onto the CloudSIM schema. Finally, the record is going to be enriched with information from match lists or threat intelligence databases such as threat level. And once done, those normalized records, click too fast, those normalized records are going to be enriched with, then normalized records, are going to be sent down the CloudSIM pipeline and compared to rules. So now we have our messages have been turned into records with data parsed from them. And now continuing with the pipeline. Each record ingested into CloudSIM is going to be compared to hundreds of built-in and custom rules. If a rule triggers, an entity will be extracted and a signal will be created. If a record matches the criteria specified in a rule, then CloudSIM is going to create a signal and start tracking an entity. The entity in a signal is going to be something like an IP address, a MAC address, a host name that's going to be extracted from records. For rules to work properly and create good signals and entities, CloudSIM admins need to work to set up the proper log and ingest mappings so this important information can be extracted from these records. And now, last step of that data pipeline is where CloudSIM is going to take everything one step further and correlate the signals into a manageable number of insights. Once again, more information about the insights, the threat investigation side of things, that CloudSIM fundamentals class is more appropriate for that. If there's questions, feel free to ask in the chat, but just that's where we cover that a little bit deeper. All right, so that's the CloudSIM data pipeline. Like I just said, any questions, feel free to ask, but let's keep going. Now, wanted to talk about Sumo Logic UI and CloudSIM UI. And specifically in there, although we're going to talk a lot about the two UIs, I'm going to start with RBAC controls. RBAC stands for role-based access controls, not unique to Sumo. What it essentially allows you to do is create a role, a type of user, and then apply certain rules or functionality to that role. So all privileges for CloudSIM are going to be controlled in the Sumo Logic UI. We won't be able to explore this using these training admin accounts that we're going to utilize shortly because they've been locked down to not prevent that, not allow that. And so it's important to know that when you provision your own SOC teams with your own accounts, that will be done in the UI. And here's kind of a little demo on the right-hand side of the screen of what the UI looks like. And as I was just alluding to, you can create different roles with different levels of access. In this case, access to insights or content or configuration. The most basic role in CloudSIM is going to be the view role. So this level of access provides view-only access to CloudSIM, but it's going to be prerequisite to all other access levels. So everybody's going to need that view. As an administrator or account owner, you may want to allow some of your users to have access to CloudSIM, but not others. You might want some Sumo Logic admins to be CloudSIM admins, or you might have some users that can be admins in CloudSIM, but not Sumo Logic. All this can be done by creating custom roles using the RBAC controls. Now, what are some roles that you might want to utilize? Well, typically tier 1 and tier 2 SOC analysts will need access to insights for threat investigation. So the insights is really going to be used for those. However, you may want to restrict this further. You might want to prevent tier 1 analysts from deleting insights. And so you can customize and fine tune that insight access, including deleting, creating, and commenting, and other various management tasks by opening the insights dropdown under the role capabilities. In addition to access to insights, you may want to give your tier 2 and tier 3 SOC analysts access to content. This role privilege allows users to create custom rules, custom insights, custom match lists, and other SOC content. You can also customize and fine-tune this access if you only want certain roles to be able to create, delete, and manage certain kinds of content. Finally, some tier 3 SOC analysts and SOC admins may need access to configuration. This privilege, as the name sort of implies, will allow users to create log mappings, customize entities, and create custom actions. And once again, you can customize and fine-tune this access as well. This is just an overview of what you can do with the RBAC controls for Cloud SIEM. If you want to know more about RBAC controls, we really focus on the in the Sumo Logic administration course on that. So this is just an overview for today. Now, that configuration menu I just alluded to, there's going to be several features that are only available to administrators. If you're a Cloud SIEM administrator with at least some configuration access, you're going to see this gear or cog icon on the top right of the pane in the Cloud SIEM UI, and we'll see that together shortly. Depending on the RBAC controls enabled for your role, you may see some or all of these menu items. Full access includes, as we see here, incoming data, entities, users, and integrations. Each of these areas allows admins to configure the data that's coming into Cloud SIEM, how the threat detection engine will use it, and how analysts can interact with the data to complete their investigations. Now, there's going to be a content menu. Cloud SIEM admins may also see additional options under the content menu that other roles do not, once again, depending on how the RBAC controls are set up. And I believe for the account you will utilize, we won't see all these items in there. And speaking of the training accounts that we're going to use. So as just mentioned, even though we've discussed a lot of different aspects of the Cloud SIEM and Sumo Logic admin menus, you're not going to see all of them today. The training admin accounts we're going to use have limited access to Cloud SIEM and Sumo Logic. You're not going to see that RBAC control. And as I just mentioned, you'll see a limited menu under content and configuration. And this is just an example of how you can fine-tune access. So how you can allow some of your analysts and junior admins on your team access to only this parts of the system that they need. So this is an example of RBAC, is the lockdown abilities or functionality you will have, but still enough to get the job done. All right, a couple more slides here. Actually, really one more slide, and then we'll get into some labs. So the last slide is around the Sumo Logic and Cloud SIEM UI. Alluded to both of them, and we'll look at both of them in just a moment. But as a Cloud SIEM admin, you're going to need to use both Sumo Logic UI and the Cloud SIEM UI. Even if you're focused on Cloud SIEM, you need to be comfortable using both interfaces. So Sumo Logic UI, when do you use that? You're going to use the Sumo Logic, use the Sumo Logic UI to add collectors and data sources that will be used in Cloud SIEM. You can write field extraction rules, which will help parse your logs so they can be better used as records in Cloud SIEM. You can configure partitions and data tiers in Sumo Logic and decide which data will get forwarded to Cloud SIEM. And once again, you can configure those users and roles for both Sumo Logic and Cloud SIEM using the Sumo Logic interface. So there's a lot of places where you're going to use the Sumo Logic UI. When are you going to use the Cloud SIEM UI? Well, everything else kind of. So in the Cloud SIEM UI, that's where you're going to configure the log ingestion mappings that will turn your log messages into records. That's where you'll create custom content to help with threat investigations, like rules, match lists, and insights, and where you can finally customize the actions, the context actions, and workflows in the Cloud SIEM interface using APIs and other playbooks. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good understanding of the two different UIs. And of course, like I said, we're going to look at them. That will give you a much better understanding is to get your hands dirty with them. So at this point, let's go ahead and yeah, let's log in. So I see there's a couple questions, but it looks like Ona is helping out, which is great. So let me go ahead and a couple steps here. Let me go ahead and provide you with our guidebook. Okay, so I'm just adding to the chat a admin lab guide that we're going to utilize for today. So go ahead and download that PDF from the Zoom chat. The other portion we're going to need today are going to be our credentials. So let me go ahead and paste them into the chat as well. I'll run through the them as well, but okay. So we're going to go ahead and log into Sumo Logic using the credentials that are on your screen or in the chat. The website, hopefully you're aware of, and if you're not, that's fine. Service.sumologic.com, that's where you're going to go to log in, period. Then the email address. So the email address we're going to utilize today is going to be training plus admin. Training plus admin, you may have used a different credential for another class. Number. So pick a 3-digit number. Maybe you want to be training plus admin 007, training plus admin 391724. Pick a 3-digit number. And then for today, the password is going to be Sumo 2021 exclamation point. So capital SUMO 2021 exclamation point. So go ahead and log in. If you need any help, let me know, although it's probably going to be a typo, but that's okay. Still let us know if you need help. Thank you for letting me know once you're in as well. So yeah, you guys have done this before. Yeah, let me go ahead and log in with you, and then let's go ahead. And also go ahead and open up that PDF. So you should have be logged into Sumo, and you should have the PDF. And the PDF right now, we're in step lab 0. And so let me just, like I said, let me just log in here and join you. So training plus 938. Oops, admin. Sorry, a little frazzled. There we go. And then that password was Sumo 2021 exclamation point. And if so let's see, it looks like you guys are getting in. Great. When you get logged in, this should be the screen you're brought to. Hopefully you've been in Sumo Logic before, but if you aren't, that's fine. But this is the screen kind of want to lead you to. Yeah, like I said, hopefully you've seen this. Hopefully you've seen some of this interface. But now let's go ahead and talk specifically about Cloud SIEM and what we want to focus on. So we have our, oh yeah, go ahead.
What happens if someone says the account is locked?
I would just try a different set of numbers. So try, it's possible somebody did lock it. Yeah, so if you could try those, just a different 3-digit number. And for those of you that need the guide, I'm going to go and paste that PDF back into the chat. So hopefully you should see it. Okay, cool. So we have our guide. So let's kind of go through our guide. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go to the Cloud SIEM Enterprise. Kind of the whole reason we're here today is to discuss Cloud SIEM. So what we're going to do is on the black bar on the far left, hopefully you see the black bar. But if you don't, you may have to go to the top left and click on the 3 horizontal lines, the hamburger icon. And now you see the black bar. And you want to go down to the black bar and go to Cloud SIEM Enterprise. When you click on Cloud SIEM Enterprise, it's going to take you into Cloud SIEM Enterprise. I'm really creative there, intentionally so, of course. So this is the environment you'll want to be in. Hopefully you've seen this before. If not, I'm still going to discuss it. But the fundamentals, Cloud SIEM class goes more into the discussion of this interface. But let's just make sure everybody's logged in first. So I think everybody's pretty good. Everybody should be in Cloud SIEM. And what we want to point out, just the last part of this step here, Lab 0, is if you click on the HUD icon on the top left, it will bring you back to this page. Now this page, like I said, I'll talk about, certainly if you haven't seen it, it's only fair to discuss it. But what we're seeing here is a heads-up display of Cloud SIEM. We're starting to see in the center panel here, the records, how many records have been ingested over time periods. We're starting to see peaks and valleys here. We're starting to see how many of those records were turned into signals, represented by these bars here. And then how many signals were turned into insights. On the far left, the far top left, we get an indication of how much data we're processing here. Over the last 24 hours, the system has looked at 636,000 records. So 636 unique records have come into the system, and the system has looked at them. And of those more than 500,000 records, it found 4,000 signals. Now, of those 4,000 signals, it looked at them, compared them, it created 10 insights. So as 636 records, we now have 10 insights, 10 actionable things we can go look at and see what's going on. And to see some of those, we would click on these and start to dig into the insights. Now, we're not going to go too deep into that today because that, like I said, that's more of a fundamentals focus, but I did just want to point out some basic functionality about the UI. And if there's questions about it, feel free to ask. We won't ignore them. But let's get back to the lab guide. So we should just be done with lab 0, which was just logging in, seeing the Cloud SIEM Enterprise option on the far left, clicking on it, and then going into the Cloud SIEM UI. Now let's go ahead and with lab 1. So lab 1, we're going to go ahead and explore the Cloud SIEM UI. So we're going to go back into the Cloud SIEM UI, the heads-up display. And the first thing we're going to do is click on the cog icon, or actually I'm not even click on it. I really just want to point it out to you. Feel free to click on it, of course, but here's that configuration icon. And as you see in here, there were less items than I showed on the previous slide because we've just locked some of you down. But that's how you can start to see what access you have, at least from a configuration standpoint. Now, next to that is going to be a help icon or a question mark with the word help. And want to show this for a few reasons. The first thing I want to show in there is the fact that when you click on it, you have more options for help. But the primary, well, not the primary, one of the uses is the announcements. By clicking on the announcements, we're going to see those things that have been modified by Sumo Logic in regards to Cloud SIEM. We're going to see release notes, end of life notices, just other stuff about what's being updated. And it's going to happen a lot. But here we see it every day, actually, we're doing updates. So there's going to be constantly new rules, primarily new rules, but other features that might be, fixes or what have you. The other thing I wanted to show in the help, so two things, is when I clicked on it first, I had a red circle letting me know that there were new announcements or that I had not gone to the announcements section previously. So now the next time I log in, if there are no new announcements, it won't be red. If it's red, then it will show me, and then I can go ahead and say, oh, today Sumo Logic released, so-and-so. The other thing that we want to show here is just the ease of use to getting to the documentation. So above the announcements icon, there's a documentation, both for API and regular, but just documentation. By clicking on it, we get into documentation. Documentation is good. Actually, not all companies have good documentation. We do. Our documentation we're really proud of, and so it's going to give you great insight into whatever you're looking into. So just wanted to show those as easy navigation ways to get to some things that might be helpful. Now, finally, what we want to show is how to get back into the Sumo Logic UI, also referred to as Continuous Intelligence Platform, or SIP. So how do you get back into Sumo Logic? You're going to click on this 9-dot square thing, switch apps, and click Continuous Intelligence. When you do, you'll have a new tab. So now you have your HUD of Cloud SIEM, and you have Sumo Logic. And we still have our documentation open, and so we could start to utilize all of those. So, it might not feel like the most important lab, but I think it is, just to remind you of where these things are, particularly the documentation when it comes time to take the exam later. That might be helpful. So just pointing that out. And we'll talk about that in more detail when we get to the exam. So that's lab 1, just like I said, just kind of navigating around. Now we're going to go ahead and look at lab 2. Actually, let me go back to my slide deck to keep me honest here. Yeah, actually I should. I'm glad I did. So going back to our slide deck, lab 0 we just did, lab 1 we just did, and now let me go through the slides before we do lab 2. Not too many slides, just a few, but just want to kind of set the table properly of what we're doing and why. So what are we about to do? Well, about to configure and enable Cloud SIEM. So after we've decided what data to ingest or not ingest, because that's going to be an important decision, we can then work on forwarding the data into Cloud SIEM. So as an admin, there's going to be several steps we need to complete to forward data to Cloud SIEM. We'll go over a high-level overview of these steps, but the exact steps will vary depending on the data you're working with. So checking the Sumo Logic of documentation for specific instructions based on the type of data is highly encouraged. But at a basic level, first you're going to request backend configuration access. This is going to be a one-time setup for each Sumo Logic organization. Your account rep at Sumo can help you with the process. It's done in the Sumo Logic UI. And so we're going to assume that that's kind of been completed. The next step is enabling data forwarding. You can do this by adding a SIM forward equals true field when you set up a collector. There's also, as we're going to see, for cloud data sources, there's going to be a toggle box, very simply a SIM processing checkbox that we can enable. And we'll see that in the next lab activity. You'll need to enable data forwarding each time you add a new data source into Sumo Logic, or if you update your partitions, or if you make any other changes to your data ingestion process. And then finally, there we go, you can configure the log and ingest mappings. This process is usually automatic, but must be completed for certain types of custom data sources. This is done in the CloudSIM UI, and we'll see an example of this in lab activities using a simple JSON log message. Now, before we do, it's important to note that you do need to enable that data forwarding. And when you do, CloudSIM will automatically start processing your log messages into records. Each record is going to contain the information from the message, parsed into key value pairs, mapped to a CloudSIM schema, enriched with other data, kind of as we discussed earlier, not kind of, as we discussed earlier. CloudSIM is not going to ingest historic data. And in other words, only or any new data ingested into Sumo Logic will be forwarded to CloudSIM as soon as you enable data forwarding. However, older data will not be processed by CloudSIM. Data will start flowing from Sumo Logic into CloudSIM within a few minutes of enabling data forwarding. And you can expect signals and insights to start generating within a few hours. Now, talking about some of the custom logs and ingest mappings, before we configure these log and ingest mappings, we need to know some things about our data. So how can we prepare ourselves? Well, we can ask these questions. One we've kind of alluded to already. Is your data structured or semi-structured like a JSON file, or is it unstructured like plain text? All are acceptable, just different considerations of what you're dealing with. Does your data have a syslog header that can be used as part of the parsing process? That's quite a tongue twister. What type of data are you working with? Is it JSON? Is it XML? Is it Leaf? Is it something else? There's going to be different best practices in the Sumo Logic documentation based on what type of data you're ingesting. Have you pre-processed your data with a Sumo Logic field extraction rule? Doing so can make the CloudSIM log mapping process much easier. And then finally, what vendor or product does your data come from? Are these Windows event logs? Are they Palo Alto Fire logs? Are they AWS GuardDuty logs? Are they something else? Which is all acceptable, but you kind of need to know what you're dealing with. Once you have those details, then you can consult the documentation for help configuring your pipeline. I'm going to paste a link into the chat into regards to the different configurations that are available in that help. Not required for today's class, just in case you're curious. Now, in the course that we're going to do shortly, those lab exercises, we're going to be ingesting and processing simple structured JSON log messages to demonstrate the configuration process. And so now let's go ahead and do so. So now we're going to go ahead and do lab 2 and 3. So let's let me get out of my slide deck. Let me get my lab guide open. And now let's go ahead and start to do lab 2. So in the guidebook, lab 2 is enabling data forwarding for an HTTP source. So as it says, I'm kind of reading it to you, in this lab, we're going to create a simple HTTP source using a pre-configuration. When we configure the new source, we're going to enable that data forwarding, and we'll show you how to do that. Then once the source is configured with data forwarding, we can start to send data in. So let's go ahead and go through these steps. Steps are pretty simple, in a good way simple, and let's go ahead and follow them. So what we're going to do first is we're going to want to make sure that we're in the Sumo Logic UI. So if we're in Cloud SIM, we're going to want to go to the 9 dots and go to SIP. Or if we have our Sumo Logic interface open still, we can just go directly into it. We're going to go to the black bar on the far left that we used earlier, but we're not going to go to CloudSIM Enterprise. This time we're going to go ahead and go to collection. So we're going to go to manage data on the far left and click collection. So manage data, collection, and then we're going to go ahead, I'm just going to delete that just to get out of the way. And then we're going to go ahead and we should be on the collection screen. What we're seeing here, if we haven't seen collectors before, are all those collectors, hate to use the name as a definition, but all these little apps, if you will, or agents that are bringing data into Sumo Logic. So here we see some that have been configured for observability usage, and there's all tons of stuff in here. There's a lab environment, and so we have a lot of different forms of data coming in here. Now for today, we're interested in utilizing one of the collectors. The collector we want to use is called admin-training-sim. It should be the first one on your list, period. I know it should be. If you can't find it for whatever reason, feel free to use the search to type, try and find it, but it should be that first one. What we want to do is we want to follow the steps in the lab, of course, and we want to go to the far right of where our admin-training-sim collector is set up, or where it is, and we want to go to add source. What we're doing now is we're describing what type of source of data we're about to ingest into Sumo Logic. And as you see, there's a lot of different sources of data. We could ingest Google Cloud Platform data. We can ingest CrowdStrike data. We can ingest Okta data, but we're not getting that fancy for today. Not that fancy. Using HTTP logs and metrics is fancy enough, but that's what we're using for today. So we're going to go ahead and click on that first icon under Cloud APIs that should say HTTP log and metrics. And now we're going to go ahead and start to describe the data that's going to be ingested. So we want to give it a name. We're going to encourage you to use the naming convention as provided, and we're going to use, or you're going to use your initials for much of today's exercises. So I'm going to call this name HTTP training data. And I'm going to use my initials, and I'm going to use a number that I don't think I've used before. Now we're going to put the source category. This source category is going to become important because it's going to help us locate this data in the future. So it's providing a metadata tag that gives some structure to our data. So I'm going to use training. I'm going to keep my naming convention the same, training JB20. Okay, now we need to go ahead and select that checkbox that I was just harping on, which is that CloudSIM Enterprise. Here's to do SIM processing. Just click the checkbox. It's that easy. Now there are other options in here further down, but we're not going to utilize those. We could normalize some time zone information or timestamps, but just not relevant for today's class. So we're just going to go ahead and scroll to the bottom and click Save. When we do, a URL should pop up. We're going to want to go ahead and copy this URL and paste it someplace that we can reference it later. So we are going to use this URL a few times today. So go ahead and put it in a notepad or just someplace sort of safe. If you lose it, it's not the end of the world, but ideally you would keep it just someplace nearby. And so now we have a URL. In that we have a HTTP source address. We can now send data to our collector because we have a destination for it. And that's what we're going to do next. So what we've done in Lab 2 is we've set up the system to start to accept our data, be aware that we're about to send data through this address. Now what we want to do is send a log message to CloudSIM using this address. So now we're going to do Lab 3, and we're going to send that simple JSON message that we've alluded to a few times today. To do so, we're going to go ahead and open up a command line interface. So a terminal or PowerShell or whatever. I guess those are really the two options. And we're going to utilize the command that is in the lab. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that command. I'm going to go ahead and paste it in, or I could paste it to a notepad first, just depending on my comfort level. I was going to say my comfort level of editing in here. Now I'm not editing properly. Hold on. Let me do that again. Let me go ahead and paste that command. And let me go ahead and edit portion of it. So we're going to have two portions of that command. The first portion we're going to edit, is going to be bracket attacker name bracket. So what we want to do there is we want to put an attack name. So we're going to use our own initials or your unique identifier. So once again, I'm just going to do quote training JB20. And I'm going to delete that attacker name portion. Now I'm going to go ahead and at the end of this command, it says HTTP source URL. Well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete those words, and I'm going to paste in that URL that I just told you to keep safe. So my command should now look like as such, and I'm going to run it. When I hit enter, it should return just a blank line. If you find it did not return a blank line, certainly make sure your syntax is correct. The other thing you might want to just verify is since you're pasting the command or cutting and pasting the command from a PDF, you might just want to make sure it's not adding some kind of weird space in there or something like that. So just check that. Yeah, the formatting could just go a little wacky on you.
Yeah,
So
yeah, we're having a few people that I think might have like quote mark issues and
okay, then let's kind of slow down here. Okay, thanks for yeah. So what I would do is I would open up a Word doc or a text pad, paste the command in there, modify it, and then paste it into terminal. Just to avoid you retyping the whole thing from scratch. And certainly, we want you to follow along the course. And if you can't, you still follow along. You'll still be able to, benefit even if you can't run those two commands. But hopefully you can. Right, so ONOU will help out, but I'm going to assume that people. I guess if some people can just tell me they ran it successfully, just so I just want to make sure it's working for some of you guys.
yeah, either a yes in the chat or using those emoji reactions, thumbs up.
Cool. Okay. All right. Good. All right. So at least some of us are still together. Great. Then thanks for just calling that out. All right. So once that ran, what did we just do? Well, what we just did is we used a simple JSON message, the portions of that simple message being the IP address and the threat name, and we sent it to Sumo Logic. Now, if, as the lab says, I'm kind of read the lab, but it's appropriate to, if data forwarding was enabled in lab 2, it should also be forwarded to CloudSIM. And so what we want to do now, or what we can do, is we can now go ahead and look at our records and see if this record is now in Sumo Logic CloudSIM from our terminal. So let's go ahead and see if it's in there. It might take a few minutes. I'm kind of tap dancing a little while I'm talking about it, but let's go ahead and check to see if it's there yet. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go back into the CloudSIM environment. And once again, if we don't have it open, we can go in Sumo and go to CloudSIM Enterprise. Once we're in the CloudSIM Enterprise, we're going to go to the top and go to Records. And now we're going to use the filtering to look for a metadata source category and look specifically for our metadata source category. So we're going to go into the filter bar and type source and find metadata source category. We're going to click on that metadata source category. We're going to say is or equals. And now we're going to use that source category that we used earlier, which is going to be our initials. And I was adding a number in there and now click enter. It might not appear yet. I'm kind of tapping my oh, it did. All right, cool. I didn't have to stall as much as I thought. What I see in there, and hopefully you see as well, more importantly, hopefully you see it, is our record. So what we see here is a record that was ingested just a few moments ago. Now there's a failed record. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but I want to see the record first. That's really the proof here of things running successfully. So hopefully you see the failed record. If you don't, as the lab guide says, it can take up to 15 minutes, although mine was pretty fast. So hopefully yours is as well. So I'm just kind of pausing just for a second. Now, let's talk about the failed record portion of it. Not the people that couldn't run the command successfully, but the fact that this record failed. Now, that's not good. Why did it fail? Well, there's a reason for it. And we're going to look at a successful record shortly, but why did this record fail? Well, why it failed, as the lab says, is because the custom JSON log message did not have a log or ingesting mapping associated with it. So the cloud message went into Sumo Logic, it went to CloudSIM, but it wasn't able to successfully complete those parsing and mapping steps because there was no mapping defined. Now we're going to correct that shortly in the next few steps, or the next few labs rather, but that's where we're up to right now. So at this point, as we've ingested data into Sumo Logic, hopefully, fingers crossed, we see that data in CloudSIM, and we see it failed because the mapping was not there. So the failed is actually good in this case, or expected behavior. All right, so just checking, or I think everyone's okay-ish. So let me go back to.
I'm still getting a lot of people with reporting errors on the command line, and I actually didn't get anybody with their reactions saying that they successfully sent it.
Oh, I don't know. Let's see.
Okay, Mayo.
Okay, May said.
The
There was a question that could the command line work from Windows 10? So no, I don't know.
someone's using it on Windows and they're not getting errors.
Okay.
Adding minus insecure sends it, but they don't see it. It sometimes takes a few minutes, Ryan. Yeah, it could be a Windows issue. It does work best on.
Yeah, and that's a good. Roberto just brought up a good point. That curl is not normally in PowerShell. So if you're using PowerShell in Windows 10, the curl command could just fail. But that should be a more obvious error message. Not obvious, but
this little thing, this little terminal is like a browser-based terminal that lets you send just curl commands. Oh wait, no, let me send it to everybody. I accidentally sent it to just one person. Yeah, it does take anywhere from 30 seconds to 15 minutes to show up in CSV. So you should be able to send the command in a terminal without any errors, and then wait a few minutes and then see your record.
All right, so for those of you that are still working on that step, feel free to do so. I'm going to go ahead and continue, I think, in the essence of time.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and if you didn't get success, you can just watch and follow along.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, let's do that. I want to keep going. We have a lot of content. So but thank you for letting us know that you're having issues. All right, let me go back to my slide deck here. Let's just make sure, once again, kind of keeping me honest in what we were doing. So we just did those hands-on labs where we enabled the data forwarding, and then ideally, we were then able to send that data to CloudSIM. So if we go back to our parsing image, I guess that's what I'm going to call this. I don't have a fancy name for it. This is what we will be doing. So as described in lab 3, you notice that that record got to CloudSIM but failed, and it failed because that custom JSON log message did not have the logger ingesting mapping associated with it. So although the message was passed successfully from Sumo Logic to CloudSIM, it did not complete the, once again, those parsing, mapping, and enriching steps of the pipeline that we see here. Probably didn't really need to bring this image up again, but just as a reminder, I think it's helpful. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead, and now we're going to go back into our hands-on labs, and now we're going to create those login ingest mappings, and then we're going to go ahead and send data to CloudSIM again, and it should map successfully. So that's the goal. So let's go ahead and do lab 4. And even if you aren't able to do lab 3, you can still participate in lab 4. The data hasn't arrived for the mapping to work, but you can still create the mapping with us. So please, please, still participate if you want to. If you don't, that's fine. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at now lab 4. So in lab 4, we're going to set up that ingest mapping. So we're going to want to make sure that we're in the CloudSIM UI. Hopefully we still have it open. If we don't, once again, far left, CloudSIM Enterprise, and that will bring you into CloudSIM UI. Now here we're going to go ahead and start to set up some ingest mappings. So we're going to go to that cog icon that I described earlier, that configuration one that we saw earlier as well. And we're going to choose one of the integrations. In this case, the integration is going to be with Sumo Logic. That's how we're going to set up that mapping. So we're going to integrations, and we're going into Sumo Logic. Now what we're going to do to set up the ingest mapping is hit create on top right. Not very creative in its design, but what we do see here are some of the ingest mappings that have been set up. So here we see ingest mappings that have been set up for CloudTrail and AWS and O365 and et cetera, and some training even that some of you have gone ahead and done already, which is good to see. So we're going to do these steps together. So in the Sumo Logic ingest mapping, top right should be a create button. And now we're going to, just again, like we were doing previously, just kind of fill in the blanks. So the source category, we're going to keep using that same source category. The format for today is going to be JSON. So as described a few times, select JSON as the format. Now for the vendor and product information, we would ideally have real product and vendor information. This might be Windows or Microsoft. It could be Linux, it could be whatever. For today, we're just going to use some, once again, using our initials to fill in these fields and provide values. So we're going to make the vendor our initials, and then we're going to make the product our initials. And we want to make sure this is enabled. You can create it, but until you enable it, it's not doing anything. So want to make sure it's enabled. So now we've created our Sumo Logic ingest mapping, and we should see it show up in here. And like I said, I see a few others in here, so good to see people are playing along. So now we have an ingest mapping set up. Good, but now we need to go ahead and do lab 5, which is setting up a log mapping so that we can utilize the custom ingest mapping we just created. So now in lab 5, we're going to go back to the cog icon. This time we're going to use the log mappings located under incoming data, excuse me. Now we see log mappings that exist in the system. We see a lot of them, and we're going to create a new one. Top right, click create. Now we need to decide what type of data are we dealing with. As alluded to a few times today, you have the options of structured or unstructured. JSONs fall under semi-structured, but that's still considered structured. So we're going to select structured mapping. Once again, we're going to give these things names. So the name we're going to do is log mapping JB20. Now we want to fill out the input-output portion. When is this log mapping going to take place? When is it going to be enabled, or when is it going to be utilized? Well, when certain criteria matches. What criteria is going to need to match in order for this mapping to be utilized? Well, we're going to fill in the blanks. So when a log comes from the vendor, I want to use that vendor that I've been creating, so that vendor JB20, and has the product of JB20, and is in the format of JSON. Now for the regex, I'm going to put .star. The reason I'm doing this is I'm saying grab all the data. So basically I'm saying, look at the data or look at the logs. If the log has a vendor of JB20 and a product of JB20 and is JSON, then create a record. Now, what type of record do I want to create? Well, I get to decide, and I'm going to utilize the pull down right here. So I'm going to select vendor match input and product match input. And now before I hit, let me see. Oh, record type. Oh, we can just leave the record for now. All right, we'll come back to that record of type. So what we're going to do now is we have our record, our input. We have the record that's going to be created, but we need to include some mappings here. And we're going to do this on the bottom portion of the screen. And so here we're going to define what we're looking for when it comes in and what we're going to output the field as. So as we did previously, we used the IP address and we took that IP address and added dots into it. We're doing similar behavior here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take our input field of IP and we're going to have that output to a field called device_IP because that's more common terminology in our organization. Device_IP. I'm going to click add field. And we're going to do this for 2 fields. So we're going to do it for the IP one, and then we're going to do it for the threat name. And the threat name, we're kind of doing the same thing. We're just normalizing the data. So rather than calling it threat name with a kind of a camel case thing going on, we prefer to use underscores. Might just be, company policy or just personal preference. But that's what we're deciding right here. And I'm going to click add field. And so now I should have 2 fields down below. So at this point, I have my name, I have my inputs and my creation. We still have to do record of type. We skipped over that. We'll come back to that in just a second. And then we have the field mappings that we want to utilize. Now, before we submit this, we need to enter a record of type, or a record type, rather. And the system's letting us know that we have not done that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the top of the screen and choose record of type, and we're going to choose authentication. And we're doing this step just because it allows us to put those other values we entered in. So, but now that we have everything filled out, we should go ahead and click submit. When we click submit, the mapping should be created successfully, of course. We should see that mapping. And if we want to, it's probably going an extra step, but if we want to go back into our mappings, I should now be able to find a mapping associated with the thing I just created. It should show up in there. Oh, because I'm not doing source category. So we could find that in there. All right, let's go back to the deck. And actually, let's do lab 6 now. Let's finish up lab 6. We'll do this step, and then we'll take a little break. Schedule-wise, we're a little ahead of schedule, which is always positive. So let's do lab 6, which is now going to send another log message to CloudSIM. So in the same way we did in lab 2, where that previous lab where some of you couldn't participate, you still may not be able to, but hopefully you can. But basically what we're going to do is just rerun that same command we did earlier, that same curl command, sending the same exact data back in. So I'm going to in this case, I'm just going to up arrow to run that same curl command. If you still have it saved in terminal or wherever, you can do that as well. And I'm going to hit enter. Now, once again, my data should be sent through CloudSIM and should be processed properly. Now, we're going to take a break here because, well, one, we need a break. But also, as we saw earlier, it could take up to 15 minutes for this data to come in. So rather than me kind of tiptoeing around it, let's go ahead and come back and see if our data is there. Now, where we're going to check, just in case you want to check ahead of time, is we're going to want to go back into our CloudSIM UI. We're going to go back to records. We're going to go back to metadata source category. So mine has not come through, which is fine. And so that's why we're going to take a break now. So we're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, and hopefully you should see 2 records, one failed, one not. So let's go ahead and take that break. I have a little clock kind of countdown thing here. I'm going to make it an 8-minute break. There we go. So let's take that break. We'll come back in 8 minutes and continue with the labs. Once again, if there's any questions during the break, although I will step away for a beverage, put them in the chat and we'll answer them once we get back. So thanks everybody getting there through today. So yeah, let's take a little break, get a snack, and come back in 7 minutes and be ready to learn a little bit more. So thanks all. See you in a few. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had a chance to get a little snack or a beverage or do whatever you like to do with 7 minutes of free time. And so we're going to go ahead and continue here. So let's see, questions in the chat. This recording will be posted. I want to put the location. Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and continue. So where we were up to when we last were together is we were on lab 6. So we were looking at the Cloud SIEM data, but what we wanted to see is our data arrive and be processed appropriately. So let's check for both of those things. So I'm going to go back into Cloud SIEM. I'm going to either refresh or rerun my criteria. Guess I'll just refresh. It should get it to me. And ideally, I should have 2 records there. And I do. Cool. So I still have my original failed record because there was no mapping. And now I have my new record, which is properly ingested. We see the authentication. Remember, we had chosen that as one of the values. The classification, we see that threat name that came through via that curl command that we ran, the IP address that curl command ran. We see the product and vendor information matching, which is why this was created. So hopefully you're at this step and you see both of these, one failed, one successful. If you don't, let us know, but that should be what you're seeing, hopefully. All right, so any questions about that portion? Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to go back to the slide deck, a few more slides here. And then we'll do some more labs and kind of like we've been doing. So let me go ahead and jump in here. And so now I want to talk more about, or more specifically about customizing and tuning your Cloud SIEM Enterprise environment. So what are Cloud SIEM rules first? So we have a properly parsed record in Cloud SIEM. And when we do, it's going to be compared to rules and potentially generate signals and insights. Rules are one of the most important pieces of Cloud SIEM threat detection engine. In that, all the records that are ingested in Cloud SIEM are going to be compared to every rule in Cloud SIEM. If there's a match, an entity is going to be extracted and a signal will be created. These entities are going to be tracked and may correlate with other signals to create an insight, which is where most threat investigations begin. As a Cloud SIEM admin, you have the ability to create any rule type. Often SOC analysts on your team who don't have these privileges may ask you for help creating these custom rules. So that's why we're showing them. One, of course, they're important, but some people may not have the ability to do these. And so they may come to you either for access or help doing them. And so let's show you what you could do. So in regards to custom rules, you don't have to write the rules from scratch. The custom rule, Sumo Logic, their content team, or our content team, is going to create and maintain hundreds of out-of-the-box rules to get you started. And you're going to see those updated rules in that announcement section that I showed earlier. That's one of the reasons why I pointed it out. It's because all these rules that are going to be updated will appear in there. But you don't always need to write. So sometimes you do need to write a new rule from scratch. You need to do this if a system that has a source, if the system has a source that isn't covered by the default rules, or if you're looking for a threat that isn't covered by the default rules. Custom rules aren't updated or deleted by Sumo Logic during these regular updates. They're going to be independent from the default rules. So if you do decide to create a custom rule or rule tuning expression, the rules will not be modified or deleted by Sumo's regular updates, which is a good thing, but an important thing to just be aware of. Now, what types of rules are there? Well, there's 4 different types. The first type is match type rule. This is really the most simple one. You're going to take it basically takes a simple Boolean statement and checks if it's true or false. If it's true, then an entity will be extracted and a signal will be created. So for example, we have here, if you wanted to look for whether an IP matches a successful IP login, matches something on a banned list. A match rule would be the best way to see if it matches, hence the name. Threshold rules. These are going to be triggered when a match is found a certain number of times. So for example, what if you want if one failed login attempt is acceptable, but 5 are not, you could create a threshold rule that would fire after the 5th failed login attempt. Chain rules. These are going to fire when certain different events happen in a certain time window. So if you want to look for 5 failed login attempts followed by 1 successful login within a certain time window, say an hour, this is where you might use a chain rule. And then finally, aggregation rules. These are going to be triggered when up to 6 different events accumulate over time. For example, if you want a rule that looks for a large number of event types from a single device IP, you'd use aggregation rules. While SOC analysts sometimes create these custom rules, it's normally done by advanced users and administrators. If you took CloudSIM fundamentals, you learned how to create a simple match rule. In these next labs, we're going to go ahead and create a threshold and a chain rule. The aggregation rules are pretty rare. And so if you want to learn more about those, let me go and paste a link into the chat about rules. That's a good link about, well, all the rule types, if you want to go deeper. So when we're creating a rule, this is a blank rule template in CloudSIM. Now we saw a similar template earlier, kind of where we had the left side of the input, the right side of the output, and that's essentially what's happening here. In this case, we're figuring out what is going to be triggered, and then when that trigger occurs, then a signal will be created. So like I said, this is a blank rule template in CloudSIM. And when you configure or create that rule, those conditions need to match. You can add rule tuning expressions here, which are going to be small exceptions to rules appended with an end statement. Once you get the rules and the record matching all kind of the way you like it, then you're going to set the conditions of the rule for the rule to fire. So we can configure the signal that will be created. We can configure in things like the name, the entity, the description, and the MITRE attack tactics and techniques you're looking for within your rule. Now, we don't go too much deeper on MITRE attack in this class. We cover it in our fundamentals class, but it's a great framework that you can utilize when you're looking at your rules. And we'll play with a little example in the lab. Then finally, you're going to need to configure the severity score. This is going to be on a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 being the most severe. You might choose a severity of 0 if you only want to monitor something but not create an insight. Higher severity scores are going to more likely trigger insights. Now, some best practices for custom rules. Before you create your custom rules from scratch, these are some of the best practices. So first, even before, like I said, creating the rule, check if an existing rule is in the system. Sumo Logic has hundreds of built-in rules, and so you might not need to write a new one. Or you might need to make a small change to an existing rule, like adding a rule tuning expression or adjusting a severity score. You need to know your system well. You need to understand the schema and the log mappings of all the records ingested into CloudSIM to write effective rules. As an administrator, it's going to be your responsibility to know this inside and out. In addition to your system's details about log mappings and other metadata, you need to understand your company's risk tolerance, risk appetite, and priorities. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's use an example. Some companies might want to monitor a large amount of outbound traffic, but not consider it to be a threat. Outbound traffic is fine, but it's something they want to, like I just said, monitor, but not a threat. And so they might assign the rule a severity of a 0, and that's perfectly acceptable. Another company might be alarmed by outbound traffic and consider it to be data exfiltration, and they might assign that same exact rule a severity of 5. Both are correct. It's just, once again, that kind of risk appetite, risk tolerance, and how your company views those type of things. Another best practice, excuse me, is understanding all the types of rules. So we just saw the chain rule, the other rules formats that I just mentioned, the match, the threshold, the chain rules, the aggregation. If your use case requires a chain rule, but you're writing a threshold rule, it might not be as effective or efficient. And so knowing the types of rules is important. Making small changes. So as a best practice, when you do write a new rule or edit an existing one, make small changes. So for example, if you're going to, you want to decrease your severity score from an 8 to a 2, don't do that extreme. Try decreasing it from an 8 to a 7, Monitor your changes. Are you being alerted too frequently? All right, maybe then change it from a 7 to a 6 rather than going from an 8 to a 2 and really not decreasing it shortly. So seeing those subtle changes might be sufficient. And another best practice is to save all new rules as a prototype. This is going to allow you to monitor the rules behavior without creating new insights and alerts, which is really helpful. And we'll utilize that as a best practice, and we do in the fundamentals class as well. So I want to talk about insight clustering here. And I really like this example that Anna created for us. It's the visual is really pleasing, if you will. So what are we showing here? So as an admin, you need to be able to help troubleshoot when insights are created into your system. You're going to need to help write custom rules as well and maintain those rules in the system. So it's going to be important that you understand how severity scores relate to insight clustering. So here's an example. Let's say on the right-hand side of the screen, we have 13 signals in our system from the last 2 weeks. And in this case, each shape on the slide represents a different signal. So we have signals for pink triangles, green squares, and blue circles. Might remind you of a breakfast cereal, not intentionally. Some of the signals, like I said, entity A is going to be pink triangles, entity B will be green squares, and then entity C will be those blue circles. And based on the rule that fired, each of those signals will have a severity score, which is the number shown in each object there on the right-hand side of the screen. By default, an entity is going to need an activity score of 12 before an insight is created. So we're looking for an entity to have a score of 12. Oh, I'm repeating the line I just said, but it bears repeating. An entity needs an activity score of 12 before an insight is created. And the activity score is going to be the sum of the severity scores from the last 14 days. So if we look at the pink triangles, there's 3 of them. We see there's a severity score of a 5 and a 6 and a 7. Will those signals turn into cluster into an insight? Excuse me. We'll find out that answer in a moment, but think about it. There's the blue circles. There's 5 of those blue circles. They have a severity of a 1, a 1, a 2, a 2, and a 3. Will those cluster into an insight? Think about it. And then finally, we have our 5 green squares with a severity of a 1, a 2, a 2, a 3, and a 4. Will those cluster into an insight? Yes or no? Or will it? So think about it for a moment. If you want to put your answers in the chat of which will turn into insights, you can. If you don't, that's fine as well. But let's go ahead and find out together. So what we're starting to see are these signals being grouped together in object shape, just to make it a little more visually pleasing. And what we see, now let's go through each one. So let's go through entity A, those pink triangles. Well, those are going to cluster into an insight. Why? Even though there's only 3 signals, they each have a relatively high severity score. The severity score is 7 plus 6 plus 5, which is 18, which is above 12. And so what we're being told, or not being told, but demonstrating here is the fact that entity A would be put into an insight because it has a high severity score, adding those 3 up. Now, what about the green squares, the bottom, and the entity B, the green squares? Those are going to cluster into an insight. Now, the scores there are relatively low, but there's a lot of them. So if you add 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, you get to 12 for that activity score. 12 is equal or greater than 12, and so that will combine into an insight. Now, what about the blue circles? Those are not going to cluster into an insight quite yet. CloudSIM is going to track this entity, but it only has a current activity score of 10. So if another rule with a severity 2 or higher triggers with that entity, it will cluster into an insight. But until that point, it won't be an insight because it's not greater than 12. So what we're trying to show here is that you can have a large number of low severity score signals that won't create an insight. You could have a small number of high severity score signals that will create an insight. And so you want to keep that in mind when you're configuring the severity scores of your custom rules. One more slide here, and then we'll go back into some labs. So some other customizations that are available in CloudSIM. These may require admin level privileges, so the SOC analyst on your team may ask help for creating these, but matchless is the first one. Match lists are going to be groups of entities that Cloud SIEM can use in rules. Very similar to allow lists or deny lists. Cloud SIEM is going to come with a dozen or dozens of standard match lists, but you can certainly create your own. Another customization that's available is or are customizing your insights. Now, I said previously that the default is to cluster entities together with an activity score of at least 12 over the last 14 days. And that's what we used in the diagram that we were just looking at, that 12 in the last 14 days. But that is configurable. You can increase or decrease the time frame. You can adjust the activity score threshold. You can create custom insights that will be created when certain rules are triggered, regardless of their severity scores. Just lots of different options. Actions, we're going to look at this in the lab shortly, but admins can create custom actions. Analysts are going to use these actions to help complete their investigations. So you can use APIs when creating custom actions. So you can have a lot of flexibility and creativity here to do things like execute playbooks, create JIRA tickets, send Slack notifications. And like I said, we'll look at an example of that in very, very shortly. And then finally, workflows. So admin can create custom workflows. By default, you can mark an insight as new, in progress, or closed. Those are the defaults. But with custom workflows, you can create a new status. So let's say you have analysts who frequently like to keep insights open while digging deeper to find the root cause. You might want to create a custom workflow called investigating to keep it separate from other insights that are at different stages of the in progress stage. So it gives you the ability to add more stages, if you will. Adding millions more might be overkill, but it does give you that ability to start to customize and certainly can be quite helpful. All right, let's go back to the labs. So let's see, questions, I think we're pretty good. So let's do lab 7, 8, and 9, and this will kind of finish this off. So lab 7, let's go back to our lab guide. Let's go back to Cloud SIEM. Hopefully still logged in. If not, hopefully you didn't get timed out yet. And so what we're going to do is lab 7 is we're going to create a threshold rule. This rule is going to look at, as it says, unique Windows events IDs that, specifically 3 of them, related to failed logins within 1 hour. So let's go ahead and start to create a threshold rule. To do so, we're going to go to the top of the screen and we're going to go to content and we're going to go to rules. We're going to see all the rules that are in here. So as described, Sumo adds a bunch. So probably 680 of these are Sumo rules, but then there's also rules that you or I may have created, other test users. Here we have, some people might even be creating them right now, but we're starting to see those in here. Now, what we want to do is we want to create a rule. So we're going to click create. Now we need to choose the type of rule. And once again, it's important to know what you're trying to do to select the type rule that's going to be best here. In this case, we're using threshold rule, so we're going to select threshold rule because that's what we want to demonstrate. We'll click create. And now, as we were doing earlier, we're going to go ahead and just kind of follow the steps in the lab. First thing we need to do is give this rule a name. So we're going to call it threshold rule, and then put those initials, and if you've been using a number or something unique to identify it. Now, under the if triggered, we're going to want to use the show advanced option. And we want to select the option of count only distinct values for a field. Now, what we want to do is we want to fill in, or continue to fill in, I guess we already started with the advanced, the if side. So what needs to occur for this signal to be created? Well, we're going to fill in the blanks. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the expression. The expression is going to be that metadata device event ID equals 4625. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that from the PDF. I'm going to paste it into my, my triggered portion of the expression. Now, one thing, this is a PDF issue, but I want you to be aware of it. You'll notice, or you'll notice now I'm saying it, you probably didn't notice before. In the image for Lab 7, the text is in red. Well, here the text is in green. And this is an artifact, probably not the proper wording, of the PDF. What we want to do here is we want to remove the quote and just redo them. And then that whole thing should turn into red. So like I said, just it's a weird PDF issue. So we want to have our expression. So we want the system to look for this field, this content, I guess. Now, what do we want it to match? We want to match records that have one distinct value. No, in this case, in the lab, we want to do 3 unique Windows Events IDs. So we can go ahead and select 3. The field we want to utilize is device_IP. And we want to do this not within 5 minutes, but we want to do this within an hour. So now the system, I don't know why that reverted to a 0 there, that's weird. So now we're basically telling the system to look for a device IP ID of 46625 that has 3 distinct values and look for that field of device IP. Now we need to fill out the right-hand side of the screen, in that once this left-hand side is matched or triggered is probably the better verb, what's going to occur, what's going to be produced? Well, now we're going to fill in the create signal. The entity we're going to use is that device IP. For the summary and the description, we're going to leave that blank, or we can just put the word test in just to put something, but ideally, it just doesn't matter for right now. Now we can define that severity score that we alluded to. If this is triggered, is this going to create a severity score of a 10, a 0, something in between? I'll put something in between, and feel free to put a value. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it does matter in the real world, but for here, we're just playing around. And finally, we can add our tags here. The tags I alluded to earlier allow us to utilize the schema from MITRE ATT&CK, which is a framework that's known. But essentially here, what we're going to do is just select one of these. It doesn't really matter which one we use for today. So just going to associate a tag. Now, before we click submit, we do want to click the box that says save this rule as a prototype, because we don't want to generate insights off of this. We're testing or playing, well, testing. And so we don't want to go that far yet. So we're going to click save this rule as a prototype. Assuming we don't have a exclamation triangle down here, all should be good to save. And so we just click submit. We should get a screen that says this rule has been created successfully. We should get the rule at the top of the screen. And if I go back into my content and go to rules and search for that rule, it should be there. There it is. Perfect. And now I see my rule. It might take a moment, like the lab says, but hopefully you see your rule in there as well. And so now we have a threshold rule created. Now we're going to do a chain rule in lab 8. So we're going to continue on to lab 8. Similar behavior to create the rule as we did earlier. We're going to go to the top of the screen. We're going to go to content. We're going to go to rules, although we might actually already be on that screen, so we can just go straight to create. But ultimately, content, rules, create, like we did earlier. And now we're going to select a chain rule. Once again, select create. We're going to give it a name. So we're going to get chain rule JB20. It doesn't matter. There we go. And now, once again, fill in the left-hand side of the screen, fill in the right-hand side of the screen. Now, in this case, this chain rule that we want to create is to, as it says in the lab, look for 1 successful login after 10 failed login attempts from the same IP address within 5 minutes. So we're looking for a very specific criteria. We're looking for 10 failed logins, and we're looking for 1 successful login after that during a 5-minute window from the same IP address. That might be indicative of a phishing attempt or a brute force attack or something, but that's the behavior we want to look for. So how do we do that? Well, we define that expression. So in step 6 of lab 8, we're going to copy it says bro_RFB authentication successful equals false. We're going to grab that and paste it in. And then we're going to go ahead and grab the second portion in step 6B, which is going to be the true statement, and paste that in. Now we need to modify the number of records here. We don't want to see when 1 false and 1 true happens. We want to see when 10 false and then 1 true happen. So we want to specify that portion in the match expression. Now we also wanted to go ahead and configure or not, depending on what we want to do, this portion here. The order is going to be important to us, because if we select in any order within 5 minutes, if somebody logs in successfully and then logs in unsuccessfully, that will show up here, but that's not really what we want. We want fails and then successful. So the order, that exact order is critical here. And so we want to specify that. We can also go ahead and modify our time period. In this lab, we're going to use the last 5 minutes, but if we wanted to search for the data in the last 24 hours, we could do that. Now that we have that if side, now we need to set up the then. So now we're going to go ahead and just kind of fill in the blanks here. The entity we're going to utilize is that device IP, because we want to group things on IP address. The summary, once again, and description, we can leave blank. I'll put test just because we can specify the severity score here. So once again, just pick something. We can go ahead and utilize our tags here as well. So if we wanted to go ahead and use one of these tactic tags, we can. Not required, but. And then we're going to scroll to the bottom. And once again, we're going to make sure to save this rule as a prototype. And then we're going to click submit. Assuming everything went well, should be brought back to our rule. And now if we take this rule and go back to our rules and search for it, we should see it. We also see the rule count is increasing. Let me just show that real fast. I think when we started today, it was at 680 or so, and now it's increased because we have a lot of creating rules, which is good. All right, cool. Let's see. That's lab 8. Let's do lab 9. We're timing-wise, we're doing great. So lab 9 is about the action button and the ability to customize this. So let me we'll look at it. Let me just show you what it looks like in the app. Just in case you hadn't gone through our fundamentals class first. So here I have my display, and let's say I select one of these insights, because that's my job to dig in here. And so I'm going to go ahead and start to look at, let's say this insight, this malicious behavior. This is interesting to me. It's or part of my job. So I can go ahead and click on it, and I can start to view this insight. And once again, this is all fundamental. So if you haven't seen this before, it's quite all right. But so I can go in here and I can start to do something. I can assign this to somebody. Maybe I want to assign this to myself. Maybe I want to assign this to my manager, or whomever. I can set the status, and we described that earlier, the new, the in progress, even creating your own custom statuses. But the actions is what we want to identify here. Let's say I go in here and I start to look at it. And you know what? I need to send this to somebody else. I want to go ahead and email this to somebody. I can choose to send this to somebody via email. I can choose to Slack this to somebody. I can choose to utilize ServiceNow and just many other communication methods. But how do you customize that action? Well, that's what we want to show now, is how to create your own custom action. So to do so, we're going to go to that cog icon that we've been using today. And we're going to go to actions, which we have not used today, under the cog icon. So cog, integrations, actions, click on actions. We see the actions already defined in the system, as described, the PagerDuty, the Jira tickets, ServiceNow. And then I also see, let's see, do I see any other? Yeah, I see just those right now, but now we're going to go ahead and create a new one. So we're going to click create. We're going to give it a name, once again, using our name, putting in those initials and number. We're going to check that the notification is going to be available on demand. So we're going to just check on demand. We're going to want to make it active. So certainly we want to enable this action. If we don't, we can make this inactive or turn it off and still create the action and then maybe turn it on later. But for today, we want to have it show up quickly. The type that we're going to utilize today, so we can use some of these as kind of a base. What we're going to use today is email, because we want to email somebody. And now we can decide, who do we want to email? So in this case, we're going to put in, what does it have us put in? Incident response, coffeelogic.com. But I could add other people. You know what, maybe when I do this action, I want this email to go to our incident response team, but you know what, it also needs to go to my manager, because she is my manager and should know what's going on. And so I can go ahead and add more addresses. Then I can go ahead and click create. When I click create, I should be brought back to the action screen and I should see some actions. I actually should see other actions that you guys are creating, which is good to see. Now we can go ahead and use our actions button. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to the insights. And we're going to pick an insight like I did earlier. Just pick one, even if it's in progress, it really just doesn't matter. But imagine you go through this, you start to diagnose it. Now we can go to actions and we can select incident response. And now when I click that, I now have had that email forwarded to myself and my manager, and then they can go to their playbook or do whatever they do to help understand what's going on with this IP with malicious behavior. So really simple to set up. Ideally, it's really simple, but quite a powerful feature, giving others the ability to communicate outside Sumo Logic and provide insight of what's going on in Sumo Logic. All right, so let's go back to our slides. We're pretty kind of done with them, but let's just go back to them just to keep me honest, like I said earlier. So let's see, lab 7, we did the threshold rule. Lab 8, we did the custom chain rule. We didn't do an aggregation rule because, like we just said earlier, they're just not used that frequently. And then lab 9, we did the custom action rule, or custom action button, rather, excuse me, earlier rule. All right, so what's next? There's a lot of stuff that's next. So in this class, we learned how data is forwarded from Sumo Logic to CloudSIM. We followed that simple log message down the data pipeline for some of us. We learned how to set up those log and ingesting mappings so that then that message could be parsed properly into a record in CloudSIM. We discussed how to provision users and roles in Sumo Logic to make sure that your users and analysts have the access they need to investigate threats, create custom rules, but maybe not do too much more than that. We learned how to create custom rules, how to make sure the data we ingest gets used in the CloudSIM threat detection engine properly. And then we created, once again, that custom action button. So what's next? It's certainly configuring the data you're ingesting, making sure you're familiar with the type of data you ingest and whether or not it's being forwarded properly to CloudSIM. And you're going to want to work with the analysts on your team to determine if you're ingesting too much or too little data. Both can be have disadvantages. Configuring the roles and capabilities of your team. So making sure those analysts on your team have access to whatever they need, can interact with insights, rules, entities, and do everything they need to complete their investigations. That custom content, working with your SOC teammates to create custom logs and ingest mappings, rules, insights, and actions that are going to suit your organization needs, or assigning the configuration role capabilities to analysts on your team and encouraging them to take this certification and do the work on their own, which is a very good solution in many cases. Getting certified, so certainly passing the CloudSIM admin exam that we'll talk about in a moment. And certainly keep learning. So if you haven't already, take the CloudSIM fundamentals class, which I kind of hope you took before this, but if you didn't, that's okay. The Sumo Logic administration class, that's a great one to learn more about that RBAC and ingestion. And then there's many other classes as well once you've mastered those. So I'm going to open up to questions. As you've been asking already, I think we're kind of caught up, but certainly feel free to put questions in. And what we're going to do now is we're going to get you into the exam. So I'm going to talk about it. Once again, if there's questions, put them in. I don't want to dissuade them. But let's talk about the assessment. Let's talk about what you're about to do. So what you're about to do is take an exam. That's going to consist of about 20 questions, and you're going to have 60 minutes to take it. You're going to need about 70 to pass. But this is an open resource exam. This exam is open, we say open slides, we haven't distributed those, but open documentation, open labs, open Google, open Sumo app. We want you to utilize those resources. You have those resources in the real world, and I feel it's only appropriate you utilize those for an exam. So as I showed earlier, that documentation, you're probably going to want to have this sort of open when you're taking the exam. So I was going to say it's a hint. It's not even a hint. It's telling you to open the documentation. I'd strongly encourage you to. If you don't want to, you can take the exam without it, of course, but it's probably going to help. So let's talk about the exam a little bit more. Just go back to my slides, sorry. To take the exam, it's going to be important that you log out of this training account because we don't want training admin 379 getting credit for the exam. We want Bob, Bill, and Jennifer to get credit for the exam. So make sure you log out and log in with your private or corporate or personal Sumo account. Going to kind of assume everyone has one here. If not, let us know, but just make sure you don't take the exam as the training user. All right, so everyone, if you want to go ahead and get logged in, that's great. I'll just a few more things to talk about, and then I'll shut up and let you take the exam on your own. Where do you go to take the exam? That's probably a pretty important thing. So what you want to do is you want to log into Sumo Logic, like I said, using that personal or professional corporate Sumo account. And you want to go to certification. Kind of obvious. But if you've never been there before, it's not. So I shouldn't have said obvious because it does get kind of hidden up here. But we're going to click on certification. And then we're going to choose get certified. This is going to take us into our Learn portal. And what we have in here is learning stuff. We have access to credentials. So those credentials that you were using change periodically. This is where you can see the latest credentials. And we have all of our different courses that we offer, or subjects really, I guess is probably a better way of putting it. So for today, we're going to go to CloudSIM. And under CloudSIM should be, or will be, a CloudSIM fundamentals exam. So we're going to want to go ahead and click on that. And I'll go through these steps a few times. It's, want to get people rolling if they're ready. You're going to click on CloudSIM Fundamentals Exam. You're going to register for free. There's no charge to you or your organization. You're going to read the little blurb, just kind of reminding you what I told you. It's multiple choice. You have 60 minutes to take it, kind of that ground rules. Now, this next step is not obvious. So I'm going to show it to you just because it's an important step. Let me just show you what I'm talking about. So you're going to come into your exam and you're going to start the exam and you're going to answer your questions and you're going to do really well or not. Hopefully you do really well, but you're going to do what you do. You're going to submit your answers. And then it's going to give you a score, hopefully a passing score. It's important that once you get that score, that you click submit results. If you don't click submit results, regardless of your score, it will not be passed to us, sent to us, and we won't have any indication that you took the exam, passed or not. So it's really important to click that submit results. Yeah, just really important to do so. Let's see, that's kind of it. Let's see. One more reminder here. Probably maybe the most important reminder for some of you. The free food that we advertised. So as a reminder, once you take this exam and pass it, go ahead and send an email to training@sumologic.com, and I'll put that. I'll just type that in the chat, or there we go. And so send us your certificate once you pass, and then we'll go ahead and send you a Uber Eats gift card for $15. So pay for one of your meals, which I think is fair enough. So please take advantage of that. Let's see. That's really about it. So yeah, that's really about it. So let's go ahead and start the exam. As mentioned, you're going to get time back today, which I think is good. So you have plenty of time if you want to take a bathroom break before the exam. Of course, that's up to you. But let's go ahead and start the exam. If you have questions when you're taking it, feel free to ask. If you do have specific questions about the questions in the exam, make sure you identify the question itself, not the number. For some exams, your question 1 might be someone else's question 30, or 20. So the number is not really unique. But yeah, let's go ahead and start that. Best of luck, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute. We'll hang out with you for a bit, and thank you for attending. I hope you found this both educational and a little bit fun. The question, yes, you want to take let me just show that again because the question came up. So just as a reminder, for the exam that we're going to take, it's going to be the CloudSIM admin exam. So under CloudSIM, there's going to be 6 courses. We're looking specifically for CloudSIM, excuse me, thank you for correcting me, CloudSIM administration exam. So we want to take the administration exam. Thank you, May. So we want to do the Cloud SIEM admin exam. I'm sorry, I did the fundamentals one earlier as an example. So Cloud SIEM administration. So once again, Cloud SIEM administration. Thank you, May. I apologize for that. If you want to join me in a few hours, we will be doing fundamentals then. So make sure you do that Cloud SIEM administration. But same rules as before. All right, so like I said, I'm going to put myself on mute. But thank you again for attending. And like any other questions, post them. The recording will be sent out. A recording and slides will be posted to the Illuminate website. Probably, Ona said later this week, and I'll stick with her answer. So I don't think it'll be done today necessarily, but certainly by the next few days, it should be up there. Great, everybody. So good luck. Thank you again for attending. Hope you found today a little bit fun, a little bit educational, and hopefully you're enjoying your Illuminate as well. So good luck on the exam. We'll be here for a little bit, just on mute. So thank you, everybody.